Hey guys, Anthony here, back for Awesome Anthony Productions. I know I haven't posted in like 3 years, but I'm gonna change that right now. The videos I was doing before, I was doing when I was at college, so I had plenty of time to edit, write scripts, do whatever the hell I want. But in that time, I've gotten married, we've moved into a house, we've gotten some fur babies, and yeah, I just don't have time for that shit anymore. With that being said, I think I want to get started by talking about a movie I just saw, a movie that I've kind of been anticipating for a while and that I didn't really expect a lot from, but that honestly kind of surprised me. And that movie is Uncharted. Now, I know that the sheer fact that there's an Uncharted movie out there that doesn't star Nathan Fillion and Stephen Lang is going to piss a lot of people off, but I gotta say I kind of liked it. I'm a longtime fan of the Uncharted games. I got into them a little late, a little after the third one came out when I got my PS3 for the first time, but I absolutely loved the trilogy and loved the fourth one. I even played The Lost Legacy and Golden Abyss on the PS Vita. I've always been a fan of Indiana Jones, of the action-adventure style storytelling, and I feel like they really did a great job translating that into video games. So as a longtime fan of the franchise, I will say that I enjoyed the movie. It's definitely not what it could have been if they would have just used the freaking games as blueprints for the story, because it was literally created like an 8-hour-long movie anyways. But what we got was actually pretty good, especially with how Hollywood has been taking franchises and ruining them lately. I gotta say this was pretty refreshing. It was a light, that fun action-adventure movie that Hollywood just doesn't really do anymore. They don't really enjoy giving people escapism anymore. It's all about politics and injecting current world issues into movies. And Uncharted doesn't really have any of that, and it's really refreshing. But besides that, let me actually get into some points about the movie. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. The cast. I'm just gonna come right out and say that in terms of the two leads, Mark Wahlberg was incredibly miscast as Sully. Mark Wahlberg's just Mark Wahlberg. He plays the same character in every movie, he plays to his strengths, and that's okay. I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get somebody or could do something that is more close to Sully's characterization from the games, but Mark Wahlberg is still as charming as ever. He's definitely a capable action star, and he plays pretty well off of Tom Holland. Okay, so now that I brought him up, let's talk about Tom Holland. I gotta say that I was kind of with everybody who was a little weary about him being casted. I love him as Spider-Man, and I've loved him since he was introduced in Civil War. I know that people like to call him Iron Boy Jr. and say that he's not real Spider-Man, but I think all of those were put to rest after No Way Home came out. But this movie proved that he's more than just Spider-Man. He can do other characters. It's not just Tom Holland playing Tom Holland in a different shirt like Mark Wahlberg does. The role shows that he's a capable action star in his own right, and he shows enough of the charm, wit, and physique to embody a younger version of the Nate we meet in the first game. And sometimes Tom Holland feels just a little too awkward, like he's channeling a little too much Peter Parker into the character of Nate, but that's here and there, it's mostly in the beginning. As the movie goes on, he definitely becomes closer to the Nathan Drake that we know and love. Sophia Ali plays Chloe Fraser, and I gotta say she did a pretty damn good job. Honestly, she felt like she was the most appropriate casting in this whole cast, as weird as that is. Yeah, her line about the fact that Sully has no friend is very cringe.
I'm a friend of Sully's.
Sully doesn't have any friends. I should know him one of them.
But for the most part, she does Chloe pretty well. The writers seem like they knew the character. They wrote her to be deceptive, a love interest when she needs to be, but also you never know when she's going to turn around and screw somebody over. And honestly, that dynamic works very well between her, Mark Wahlberg, and Tom Holland. Nate, Sully, and Chloe. Even though Nate and Sully aren't as accurate as they could be, they definitely have a rapport and banter between them that is taken right out of the games, and it feels very authentic. Now let's talk about the villains. This is another part of the movie that was a little weak for me, because Uncharted has given us some truly great villains, and Antonio Banderas, yeah, he's there, he's intimidating enough, but his screen time is very limited, and his motivation just is lame. I mean, his motivation literally just comes down to money. And honestly, the secondary antagonist, the mercenary he hired, Joe Braddock, by the way, these are two completely new characters that were invented for the movie. Anyway, Joe Braddock is played by Tati Gabrielle, and she's a bit of a mixed bag. As a new character, she is slightly interesting. She has a presence. She plays very well off of Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland when she interacts with them on screen. And she definitely holds her own during the action scenes, even though those scenes were a little ridiculous with her throwing around Mark Wahlberg like he's a rag doll when he easily probably has 100 pounds on her. She's badass and intimidating. They try to kind of do this thing with her to set her up as maybe a bigger villain, but honestly, her motivation felt even thinner than Antonio Banderas' character, so she was never really that scary to me. but she does the job she needs to do for the story. Speaking of the story, I think I can get into the plot right now. So obviously the story is about, what else would an Uncharted story be about? Treasure hunting. It takes Nate and Sully's introduction from Uncharted 3, adds about 10 years to it so that they meet each other in New York when Nate is working as a bartender, stealing things from wealthy customers. Sully meets him, and they go on their quest to find Magellan's missing gold, which, as they show with some exposition and some flashbacks, has been something that Nate and his older brother Sam have been obsessed with since they were children. That flashback also shows Nate and Sam as kids when they're living in an orphanage together. Shows how Nate kind of got into the whole treasure hunting thing with him and Sam breaking into museums and ending with Sam having to run away so that he doesn't get sent to the police. It really gives a lot to Nathan's character, bringing in Sam's story so early in the Uncharted narrative as opposed to it coming in the fourth game like it did. And honestly, the scene where they have to say goodbye probably got my biggest emotional response out of the whole movie, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because it's a great scene, but when they try to bring emotional parts and emotional beats back in later in the movie, they don't work as well. From there, we get the typical stuff, Nate and Sully meeting, them discussing their plan. We get the typical Uncharted globe-hopping stuff while we meet Chloe and the antagonist. There's action scenes, the usual stuff. And it honestly all works pretty well. The story takes its time setting up the characters, like I said, before kicking off the rest of the plot, so at least you know who everybody is and what they're about before we get into things. And there's enough intrigue within the story and the mystery of Magellan's treasure to keep you invested in between the action scenes, the character development, and the humor, which, I gotta be honest, the humor is admittedly hit or miss. Some jokes work really well, especially when Chloe and Nate have to turn their keys at the same time. And Mark Wahlberg and Tom Holland do have a lot of great banter. But like I said, a lot of the humor is hit or miss, especially between their lines together. To end on a positive note, though, I absolutely loved how they captured the feel of the Uncharted games with the banter between the characters, even though some of it's a little hit or miss. The treasure hunting, finding clues and actually speaking about them and looking through things. They even consult Nate's notebook at a few times, which if you played the games, you know that is a huge part of solving puzzles. And of course, the cinematic action scenes feel like they were taken right out of the game. The standout one, which is in all the trailers, is the plane scene, which is taken right from Uncharted 3. And there's some typical hand-to-hand combat and gunplay scenes, but those are pretty tame and honestly kind of average. And honestly, if you get through that much of the movie and all the things I've mentioned before either don't bother you or you like them, then the whole movie and your whole experience and whether you like it or not is going to depend about how you feel about the last act. The last act goes completely insane in terms of action and realism, in terms of what things that have been existing for hundreds of years can structurally do, in terms of what people can survive. The movie just goes balls to the wall, batshit, dialed up to 11, insane. And I love it. I loved it. This is Uncharted we're talking about. At the end of the first game, you get attacked by, like, zombie mutant monster things. And knowing that, honestly, in comparison, the end of this movie is pretty tame. Honestly, I thought it was the right amount of silly to just bring this movie home and make it a ton of fun. Combine that with the fact that the last act finally gives us the Nathan Drake we know, the secure, badass action hero with the same costume that we know from the cover of the games. Plus, if you're listening closely, you might hear a familiar theme song triumphantly come in over the score during that last act scene. Ultimately, Uncharted could have been a lot worse. It shows a lot of respect to the games and shows a lot of promise for what's to come. By the way, there are 2 credit scenes, but they play early in the credits so you don't have to sit to the end like you do with a Marvel movie. Honestly, I thought that this ended up being more than just a decent action-adventure movie, and it was definitely better than most video game movies. Don't think too much about it. We got an Uncharted movie that wasn't bad, and that's good enough for me. Did what most video game movies try and fail to do, except for maybe Sonic the Hedgehog. It made me want to go back and play the original games while still being excited for a sequel. If you enjoy the games, just go in and have fun. Alright, that's all I have to say about Uncharted. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one.